So stop me if you've heard this one before. But the rootstocks that we've chosen for today are MM106, which were developed in a place called East Malling in Kent, and I don't think they're actually very old as a kind of technology, if you like. But there are several different kinds of rootstocks that all have similarly memorable names. They're basically chosen for primarily the final height that a tree will get to. So for example, an M25 will give you a tree, the size of some of these really, full-sized trees for much larger orchards. MM106 is somewhere in the middle of the larger size and a dwarfing tree. I've chosen them here really because they're some of the most versatile rootstocks that you can get. They're most often used for espalier training and cordons and stepovers and that kind of thing. But the final size of the tree is such that they're very easy to harvest from. That's why they're quite often chosen for more manageable sized orchards, I suppose. Basic principles of grafting. I will demonstrate now. So the idea is really that the rootstock obviously is providing all of the energy and its size properties to the scion wood, which is obviously what you cut from the variety that you're wanting to fruit. It's very important that you get material that is from the previous season's growth and that is strong and vigorous. That said, you want to watch out for what are called water shoots, which are the shoots. They look like this, but they tend to come from the main branches or from the trunk. The reason why you want to watch out for those is that they aren't productive like these are. They tend to just develop into more branching, woody stems. They're not. They won't tend to develop into fruiting twigs, which is what you obviously really want. Obviously now we're in January, sort of getting towards late January. This is an ideal time to graft, although you can graft right into February. And in fact, I discovered this year that most nurseries won't provide rootstocks until February anyway. So we're waiting on another load that we're going to be grafting from this year. Hygiene is really important as well, obviously. One of the downsides to grafting is that you can, there are two downsides in this particular regard. One is that if you take from a diseased tree, you're going to propagate that disease as well as the tree itself. And the other thing is that if you've got bacteria or fungal diseases on your cutting tools, as a result of using them elsewhere in the garden, what you'll end up doing is actually sealing that in. Once you've made your cuts and you've used your grafting tape, you'll end up sealing it in, which can obviously compromise the graft and massively reduce your success rate. So hygiene is really important. There are two ways that you can manage that. One of them is using a sort of proprietary mix like this. This is basically just alcohol. There's nothing fancy about it. It's not a dangerous chemical or anything nasty. It's perfectly safe. That's a nice, quick and easy method. Obviously, if you want to go a bit cheaper than that, you can just use a naked flame. That wouldn't work on a day like this outdoors anyway, necessarily. But a naked flame is perfectly acceptable. Just passing your cutting tools through the flame, not a problem at all. So. What you're really looking for with cutting down your scion wood, your rootstock wood, is just to make a nice straight cut along the top, and I'll show you how that's different to the scion in a minute. Certainly with the scion wood, you'll want to try to preserve a bud, sort of cut behind a bud, because that's going to give you a really nice strong growing point. And there's obviously actually a lot of growth cells concentrated in that part of the stem. I like to try and do something similar with the rootstock as well, although I don't think it's necessarily quite as important. Not everybody seems to do it in that way. But what you're aiming for with your cut really is somewhere in the region of an inch to 2 inches long, and you're aiming to cut through about halfway through the stem. I should say as well that this is one of the simplest grafts that you can do. This is called a whip graft, otherwise known as a church window graft as well, and I'll show you why it's called that in a minute. So the best technique for cutting as well is actually to cut towards you, which always seems a bit counterintuitive, but it really does give you the most control, and yeah, it's just you know, much easier than trying to cut away from yourself. So holding the rootstock and the knife quite close to your chest, get the knife in as far as you can go without obviously it being dangerous, and there we are. That's basically as simple as that. I might need to tidy that up a little bit actually, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. So, like I say, with the scion wood, we're going to try and choose somewhere. You can see here actually that this is, you see this what's called a collar here. Yeah. So that's the point where this year's growth meets the previous year's growth. I say this year's, I should say last season's growth meets the previous season's growth. So obviously this is where the apical bud has grown into a nice strong stem here. This variety that I've cut here is a Bramley, and our Bramley here is very, very old and is in decline. So it would be nice to increase our stock so that if it does go south at any time, we can replace it. So I'm going to cut along the bottom now. It's really
above or below that joint?
Oh yeah, I'm going to go above that joint because it's the current season's growth or the previous season's growth that you want.
Right.
So yeah, we're cutting above that collar. Get rid of the growth that was from the season before.
Right.
Yeah, just concentrate on the growth that we need. So the thing with whip grafting or church window grafting is that it's specifically for scion wood and rootstocks that are the same diameter. There are various grafting techniques that are used for other situations, like bud grafting and spliced side veneer grafting, and they've got all these fancy names, and they've got very, very specific applications depending on what you're grafting. Sometimes different species need different kinds of grafts. They won't respond to one where they will respond to others. The season can make a difference as well. Some grafting is done in the summer, and some is done at more this time of year. So, but this is a very simple graft, very, very easy to get the hang of. And you find that it's used most often, I believe, in commercial apple production because it's very, very quick, and you can produce a large amount of trees in a very short space of time. You know, some people with you know, relatively low staffing levels can produce thousands and thousands of trees in a season. You know, they might spend a couple of weeks just working full time on grafting, and they can get a huge amount done. It's really something to watch when, you know, people are really experienced with it and they're going through quite a lot. So like I say, I'll do the same thing. You know, try and cut a sort of inch or two on the scion wood, and I'm going to cut obviously behind this bud here, so that we can try and take advantage of the growth cells that are particularly concentrated around that bud. So same thing again. It's about halfway through. Okay, There we are. So you can see they're roughly, you know, the same size, and hopefully they should take quite nicely. Now, the really important thing to get right with this is the fact that obviously you have the bark on the outside, and then you have the heartwood on the inside. Now, between that is an area called the cambium, and that is where the growth cells are concentrated. That's what gives the trees their lateral growth. So the really important thing with grafting in this particular case is that the cambium of the scion and the rootstock are as much as possible in contact, because that's where they will fuse and start growing together. We're slightly off on some of that, but you can see here as well why it's called the church window, because you've got the arch there at the top. It's a nice evocative name. I can see that there's not actually a very good contact there. You can sort of see daylight between that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to try and tidy this up a little bit. I can see that actually I've been a bit not so good with my cut there. But it's perfectly all right to, you know, work away at it until you get it right. It's, you know, there's no great panic, as long as you're not going massively over the sort of halfway mark. Really, you can use actually the sort of pith in the middle as your guide. And if you do make a mistake and you know you have to start again, you can just cut that off and start again a bit lower down. I mean, obviously, you've only got a certain amount of times that you can do that. But you know, there's no great panic. You know, they're quite forgiving. They're quite forgiving materials that you're working with. So don't panic. I mean, you can see that obviously. Okay, and then your grafting tape comes into play. So this is sort of magic stuff.
What would have originally been used?
I think originally people would have used some kind of twine, I suppose, like you know, a thread of some sort. You know, whether that was made from grass or
would they have waxed things to keep the water out?
Yeah, I think they did.
Wax as well.
Waxed it.
Yeah, but I think if you're going sort of right back here, you know, grafting is a very old technique.
Right, yeah.
There's evidence of it from at least 2000 BC in China and the Mediterranean basin as well. So wax certainly, I suppose beeswax or something.
To seal the water out, to keep the water out.
But yeah, now we use grafting tape. People used to use tar as well. You know, in the more sort of recent times, so back in the sort of Victorian era, certainly. But that's definitely fallen out of favour now. There doesn't really seem to be much need. And we have lots of different types of grafting tape. Some of them are petrol-based, and you can get biodegradable ones as well. But I actually have found that the biodegradable ones aren't they're not quite as sticky. You know, they tend to unwrap quite easily. So yeah, I think people still need to work at working at it. So really now it's just a case of you'll find as well that it's very stretchy stuff, and as you're winding it around, you know, you need to kind of stretch it out to get it as taut as possible. You want to make sure that, you know, it's really nice and tight as you can possibly get it. It's going to be on there for at least a season. It's unlikely to be on there for longer than a season. I think by the following winter you should be able to take it off. But the important thing is as well to make sure that you're completely covering the wound. You know, so you want your grafting tape to go a little bit underneath that side and a little bit over there as well, so that there's nowhere that you know, air or pathogens or anything can get in. Turn it off. Okay. So the next stage is to cut the scion wood down to 3 or 4 buds. You know, try to find one that looks, you know, nice and strong, nice and healthy. So I'm going to take it down to this one here. So that's 3 buds. Take it down to there now. With apple trees, obviously they have an alternate pattern to their buds. So you have to make sure that you do a good sloping cut and sloping away from the bud. I'm sure most of you understand this principle anyway, but you know, the risk of cutting flat is that water will pool on it, and then you can end up with rotting. So nice and close to the bud, a good sloping cut away from it, and there you have it. That is a Bramley grafted onto a 106 rootstock. Now obviously you want to get it into the ground as soon as you can, or into a pot. Obviously the advantage of getting it into a pot is that you can, you know, obviously control its growing environment. But the important thing there obviously is to keep it well fed throughout the season, and make sure that you check it regularly to see when it needs repotting. But you know, depending on how long you want to keep it in a pot for, you can keep repotting it and bring it on that way as much as you like. You can put them then into nursery borders as well, but the thing to watch out for there is that you don't leave them in a nursery border for too long, because once the roots really start getting established in the ground, they get harder and harder to dig out, and they won't forgive you for it eventually. So really you only want to keep them in a nursery border for a year at maximum, and then really you'd want to get them out into their final planting.